In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a straight-ahead fire animation using Adobe Flash or Animate. Now, one of our principles of animation is straight-ahead or pose-to-pose. That means that there are two different methods of creating an animation. Let's say I wanted to have a ball rolling across the screen. So I could start, I've got my brush here, quick key for brush is B, and I can make that brush bigger or smaller by pressing the brackets to the right of the P on your keyboard. And let's say I draw just a circle here. Now, if I want this ball to move across the screen in a second from the left side to the right side, I could do it straight ahead, which means I just kind of go for it. I just draw every frame in the order in which it'll be seen. So I can press F7, turn on my onion skin here so I can see the ghost. Click there for the next one. F7, draw the next one. The issue with straight ahead is it's very difficult to tell exactly where you're going to end up. If I keep drawing at this distance, so it stays pretty consistent in speed, I'm going to be all the way to the other side in only 12 frames. So that's only half a second. So if I play this now, it's much faster than I had planned because it's difficult to get timings down when you're doing straight ahead. Now, pose to pose means that I would draw basically this way. I would draw where I want it to begin. That's my first pose. And then I would move forward to a second, which is frame 24. So I'd create a new frame here on 24 by pressing F7 and draw another circle. And now I would figure out all the steps in between. I'd go halfway and figure out what halfway between those would be. And I would just keep doing that, which we will talk about more later. But the pose to pose is a much more complex method of figuring out the process. But you can get a lot closer to this timing that you want if you do this pose to pose. Now, straight ahead is great for doing animations that have a lot of dynamicism to them, that they're really random, things like fire and smoke and other effects. And so that's what we're going to use it for today. We're going to make a fire. And the thing I like about creating animation with fire is that no matter how you do it, it looks pretty good, because fire is pretty random. So what I'm going to do is I have this brand new frame. I'll go ahead and double click on this layer and call it fire. And I got out a red-orange brush here, and I'm just going to draw some kind of fire. So I'm going to maybe and I can press K to get to my paint bucket and fill it in. And if I want to resize it, I can always select something using the arrow tool, and Q allows me to resize it. So if I wish it was a little smaller to start with, I'm going to use Q, and I can grab one of the corners and hold down Shift and resize it. These are all things I can do to shapes. Notice that when you select a shape in Flash or Animate, it's filled with a bunch of dots letting you know that it's selected. And now I have my very first frame, and I can always add more stuff to it. It's one of the nice things about working digitally. And I'll come back later and add some more. So now I'm ready to move to my next frame. I'm going to animate on twos, which means instead of animating every frame, I'll animate every other frame. This makes your animation a little more choppy, but it cuts down your workload in half. So instead of just pressing F7 to go to the next frame, I'm going to click on the next odd frame, which is frame 3 down here, and then I'm going to press F7 again. Whenever we press F7, that creates almost like a new sheet of paper. It's a whole new keyframe, and I can only draw new things on new keyframes. So when I press F7, I get a new empty keyframe. It's like I've set another sheet of paper on top of the old one. But it would be nice to see my previous frame. And so I can create a ghost of my previous frame by turning on onion skin, which is here at the bottom of the screen. If I click on this, I will see a very faint outline of my previous frame, which can help me to draw my next one. Now, my fire is fairly random. I know that these little tongues of flame should be moving up as they go, so I'm going to try to draw in this next frame each of those a little higher than they were before. And I'll press K to fill it in. And then I'm going to move forward to the next odd frame, which is 5. So I click on frame 5 here, press F7. And now I can see both of my earlier frames. If that's confusing, these bars here represent how far back and forward into your timeline your onion skin is showing. So I can actually drag this forward so it only shows my very last frame. And so then I can draw again here, press B to draw. press K to fill that in again. And each new time, I'm just going forward. I'm just going for it. I don't know what it's going to look like when I'm done. I could have a plan beforehand, but in this case, I'm just straight aheading it and hoping that it works out. So I'll press F7 again, and now I'll draw again. Press B. So I'll go forward 2 more frames now, press F7 again. And I'm using K to paint it in. And so I want to keep going forward maybe a second or so, 24 frames or so, which would be 12 frames of drawing. I don't have to do a lot because I'm going to make this a cycle animation, which means that it's going to loop and repeat over and over again, and I only have to draw out that first sequence, and then I could run it indefinitely. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it and continue this animation. Let's maybe see before then how it's looking. So a couple ways I can test it. I like turning off the onion skin to test it, and then I can press Control and Enter to create a SWF to see it. I can turn on the loop and change how often it's looping by pressing through here. And so I'm going to keep going with this, and then I'll unpause it and come back. Okay, so I went back and refined some of my earlier frames so that the last frame and the first frame were more similar. And so now if I turn on my loop here and I hit play, I should see that it doesn't look too bad. I've got a couple of places where I've got some bouncing, but I can always come back here and adjust that. So if I don't like how some of those frames look, I can always delete them and try them again and see how that looks. So if I want to add additional elements, say I want another color in there, I want a brighter yellow, the best thing to do would be to put that on a whole other layer. So I'm going to click on this button here. In the bottom left corner is your new layer tab, and layers work like layers in Photoshop and Illustrator. Anything you draw on one is separate from the other ones. And I'm going to name this new layer Fire 2, or maybe Yellow Fire or something like that. And I want to make sure to lock, click this dot underneath the lock on whatever layer I'm not working on. It's very easy to accidentally draw on a layer that you think you're drawing on, but then you realize that you're drawing on a different layer. So I always lock any layer I'm not currently working on. And on this layer above now I can do the same thing. I could draw in here, press K, and I could fill in this, go forward 2 frames, and maybe I'll even turn the visibility off on that one. Turn on my onion skin here, and that's very faint because it's yellow, but it'll give me an idea of where I can change it. And with this one I think I've got some more freedom just to kind of do whatever, because it's just the inside fire. So I think if I change that one a lot, it'll look pretty good no matter what I draw inside of there. But this is the essence of straight ahead animation. You kind of just get a feel for what you want, and then you do that. And so if you keep adding these, I did about a second's worth of animation for the fire, and as I add these new elements, every new thing I add will make a positive impact on my overall design. One other thing that I can do, if I want to add like a fire log at the bottom or something, anything that isn't moving or isn't part of your animation, you should put on a separate layer as well. So if I create a new layer here and I call this logs, and notice that when you create a new layer, it automatically is the length of the current animation. So the fact that this is a dot here, but then it's a bunch of nothing until this box at the end, this is all a single frame, just extended. So anything I draw at any point along this will happen for the entire length of that. So if I come here and I draw, let's get some brown here, and I'll go back to my brush, and I'll try to create a log here. This log will actually exist for the entire time. And so I can not have to redraw my backgrounds over and over again. I can get away with drawing less since that log layer is up on there, that'll just be its own separate thing. And each new thing that I draw will add to my animation. So try to spend or get a second or so of animation of this fire in any method that you want, and then you can, when you're done, when you save this, when you save as, that'll save a flash file, and that's your working file. That's the file that you'll come back to and be able to work on. It'll still have all of your layers and your frames and everything. If you want a file that you can actually show people, there's two methods. If you press Control and Enter, that will create a SWF file with the same name and in the same location. You can also come to File, Export, Movie, and choose either an animated GIF or a SWF here as well. Animated GIFs are just image files that can store transparency frame or animation frames, and so that's a really good way of saving an animation, and that'll loop automatically unless you tell it otherwise. The same thing with the SWF, and that's how you finish the animation.